March 25th, 2004, Robertson County, Tennessee. A woman enters a strange white car with her daughter and is never seen again, ever. Adriana would have been 23 this year, maybe still living somewhere in Robertson County, Tennessee. A man named Joey Benton walks into the sheriff's office looking visibly shaken. He tells deputies that his girlfriend, 21-year-old Jennifer Wix, and her 2-year-old daughter, Adriana, have vanished. He says he last saw them at a gas station in Cross Plains, getting into a white sedan with someone he doesn't recognize. And just like that, they were gone. That's the story Joey told. But stories like that, they don't always hold up. They say time heals everything. But sometimes it does the opposite. It eats away. It festers. And one day, after years of silence, people start to talk. Not always to confess. Sometimes to rewrite the story, to make themselves look innocent again. Because living with a dark secret doesn't always break you from guilt. It breaks you because the silence gets too heavy to carry. You'll find them everywhere, in small American towns, from the quiet roads of Tennessee to forgotten corners of Kentucky, Florida, New York, even California. People who resurface after decades, not to admit guilt, but to reclaim control of the story. In Robertson County, Tennessee, that silence has a way of catching up. Because in places like this, time doesn't forget. It just waits. And when it does, everything changes. On the surface, it sounds like one of those random disappearances. But the moment Jennifer's family heard that story, they didn't buy a word of it. Not one. Why? Because Jennifer was a young mom, the kind who never went anywhere without Adriana's diapers, her car seat, her baby bag, all of it left behind. And the idea that she'd just hop into some stranger's car, no explanation, no supplies, and vanish into thin air, it made absolutely no sense. From day one, the Wix family's suspicion pointed straight at Joey. They'd seen the way he and Jennifer fought. According to her mom, those arguments weren't small disagreements. They were the kind of fights that made your stomach twist. The last time Jennifer's mother ever heard her daughter's voice was over the phone, from inside the Benton house. Jennifer was crying, upset, saying she just had a heated argument with Joey and his parents. In the background, little Adriana's cries could be heard echoing through the call. Jennifer promised to call her mom back once things cooled off. That call never came. After that, silence, no texts, no follow-up, nothing. Jennifer and Adriana were just gone. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and the Robertson County Sheriff's Office jumped in. They canvassed neighborhoods, organized search parties, hung flyers with Jennifer and Adriana's faces on them. 2 smiles frozen in time. They even searched the Benton property, combing through every inch for clues. But no one, not Joey, not anyone, was named a suspect. As the months passed, tips dried up. Leads went nowhere. And what started as a missing persons case slowly began to fade into another cold file collecting dust. Then in 2013, almost a decade later, the TBI reclassified the case. Homicide. That one word changed everything, and yet somehow nothing. Because even with that shift, evidence was scarce. There wasn't enough to charge anyone. There wasn't enough to bring Jennifer and Adriana home. But there was one person who never stopped pushing, Casey Robinson, Jennifer's younger sister, Adriana's aunt. Casey was just a kid when her sister vanished, but she grew up chasing the truth. Over the years, she's become the voice for her family, the one person who refuses to let Jennifer and Adriana's names disappear. She's knocked on doors, confronted people, dug into old files, even started her own podcast dedicated to finding answers. Casey Robinson carries a quiet strength, the kind you only get from surviving heartbreak that never really ends. When asked about Jennifer and Adriana, her response is immediate and raw. The first thing, she said, heartbreak. that hole that never really goes away. She said Jennifer wasn't just her sister, she was her idol. A true 90s kid, funny, protective, full of life. I wanted to be her, she said. Everything she did I looked up to. And then there was Adriana, 2 years old when she disappeared. A tiny, perfect little girl with big brown eyes. Casey helped take care of her all the time. Now, as an adult, she said, I think of her like a daughter. She'd be in her 20s today, but in my head, she's still 2. Frozen in time. Every word she spoke carried a mix of warmth and ache, the kind that lingers when you've been waiting for answers for 20 years. Over the years, Joey Benton's story hasn't stayed consistent. He's reportedly told different versions of what happened that day. One where he says he dropped Jennifer and Adriana off at the gas station and saw them climb into that mysterious white car. Another where he claims he saw Jennifer later with some friend he didn't recognize. Even with those shifting accounts and decades of rumors, no one's ever been charged. But Casey hasn't given up. She even spoke with Joey herself last April after years of silence, trying to understand, maybe even get a reaction. It's the kind of courage only someone desperate for truth can summon. Because for Casey, this isn't just a story. It's her sister. It's her niece. It's 20 years of waking up every morning hoping that today might be the day someone finally talks. And until that happens, she'll keep pushing. With her podcast, with interviews, with every ounce of strength she has left, to make sure the world doesn't forget the names Jennifer and Adriana Wix. April 2024. 20 years after Jennifer and Adriana vanished, a major raid occurred at the Benton home. Dozens of officers, flashing lights, news trucks crowding the road. For a moment, everyone thought this was it. Maybe it was connected to Jennifer and Adriana. But it wasn't. Turns out the raid was tied to Joey's father. Illegal weapons, disturbing materials on a computer, more than 40 charges in total. Still, that moment cracked something open. Shortly after, Casey picked up the phone and called Joey. "Can we talk?" she asked him. "You were the last one who really knew my sister. I just want to understand her better." To her surprise, Joey agreed. They spoke for over an hour. Casey asked about his relationship with Jennifer, and Joey painted a picture of love. He said they adored each other, were planning to get married, even talked about having another baby. When she pressed him on the events of March 25th, 2004, the day her sister vanished, he didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, everything people had heard was true. He dropped Jennifer and Adriana off at the gas station. He saw them get into a white 4-door car. And that was the last he saw of them. He was polite, calm, even friendly. They ended the call on good terms, and for the first time in 2 decades, Casey found herself wondering if maybe they had it wrong all along. Joey sounded sincere. Maybe Jennifer had gotten into that car. Maybe he was telling the truth. But that feeling didn't last. Because by July of that same year, everything flipped. The Benton family was tearing itself apart under the pressure from that raid. Allegations were flying. Joey and his relatives had apparently turned in his father for what they'd found on his computer, the illegal weapons, and even sexual exploitation of a minor. It was chaos inside that household. And right in the middle of that storm, Joey did something no one saw coming. He showed up, uninvited, to a meeting Casey's family was having with the district attorney. He said he was done hiding. He wanted to come clean. He sat face to face with Casey's mom in Springfield, the same town Jennifer and Adriana disappeared from. Casey was on speakerphone, listening. And that's when Joey said it. He said the gas station story, the one he'd been repeating for 20 years, was a lie. He said Jennifer and Adriana never left the house, that they died there, inside the Benton home, on March 25th, 2004. A completely different story from the one he'd told Casey just months earlier. When asked how they died, he offered what Casey calls another version. A new lie, perhaps, just as polished as the old one. He claimed that when he came home from work that day, Jennifer and Adriana were already gone, already dead. But Casey didn't buy it. Neither did investigators. They couldn't verify any part of that version. No evidence, no corroboration, nothing to hold on to. Still, Joey went further. He said he knew where the bodies were. He gave law enforcement a specific location in Robertson County. Said it wasn't his family's property. Said he'd been one of the people who helped dispose of the remains, and that he hadn't reported their deaths. Search teams went out. They combed the area multiple times, but nothing was found. No trace of Jennifer, no sign of Adriana. So was it the truth, or another misdirection? Casey doesn't know. To this day, she refuses to share exactly what Joey claimed happened because she doesn't want to help spread another false version of events. Her focus is simple: finding the truth, not another lie dressed up as a confession. And that brings us to now, the latest development in the investigation, and the evidence that could finally change everything. Cold cases matter. That's what Detective Troy emphasized after serving nearly a decade in cold case homicide. For him, these investigations are not just files on a shelf. They are unresolved stories, missing people, families still waiting. He explained that law enforcement agencies treat cold cases differently depending on leadership and priorities. Some departments see their value and dedicate time, resources, and personnel. Others shift focus elsewhere, diverting attention to new crimes or immediate threats. Yet, the families never stop asking questions, and the investigators who care never stop pushing. According to him, investigative techniques have advanced dramatically since 2004. DNA analysis has evolved beyond anything imaginable 2 decades ago. Forensic investigative genealogy, MVAC, and familial DNA searching have transformed how old evidence is examined. Each year brings more precise tools and stronger databases. But even with all that science, traditional police work still plays a crucial role. Sometimes it takes a mix of both, the data and the human instinct, to find what's been hidden. But what happens when there's no body? That, he said, is one of the hardest challenges in any investigation. A body is more than just evidence. It's a scene in itself, often holding the key to what happened and how. Without it, the case becomes a steep uphill climb. Still, it doesn't mean it's hopeless. The truth, he said, always finds a way to surface, no matter how deeply buried. He wasn't surprised by how long this case has remained unsolved. People who commit crimes like this often go to great lengths to cover their tracks, to make sure the story never lines up. What makes this case different, however, is the family. Their persistence has kept the investigation alive. Despite years of silence and frustration, they've refused to let Jennifer and Adriana be forgotten. Over time, the investigation has taken many turns, some visible, some hidden from the public. Certain details remain sealed, not because there's nothing there, but because revealing too much could jeopardize potential breakthroughs. According to the Tennessean, the Benton property has been searched multiple times over the years, including the draining of a pond. Law enforcement confirmed that Joseph Frank Benton Sr. has not been ruled out as a suspect, though no arrest or direct connection to the missing persons case has ever been made. Then came 2024. 20 years after Jennifer and Adriana disappeared, law enforcement raided the Benton property. The discovery was disturbing: a large cache of weapons, explosives, and explicit materials. Benton Sr. was charged with dozens of offenses, though none directly linked to the disappearance of Jennifer and Adriana. According to Casey, Benton served about a year in prison before some of the charges were dropped. After his release, something strange happened. He disappeared too. And then, in July of this year, everything shifted again. a development that no one, not even the family, saw coming. A human leg was pulled from a creek not far from Springfield, and DNA confirmed it belonged to Joseph Frank Benton Sr., the same man whose property had been raided just months earlier. Now, Benton Sr. and his family had always lingered on the edges of suspicion, tied by proximity and whispers to the disappearance of Jennifer and Adriana Wix. But his death? That complicated the story in ways no one expected. Investigators quietly admitted it cut both ways. On one hand, Benton Sr. had been one of only 3 people believed to truly know what happened to Jennifer and Adriana. With his death, one of those voices, one of those potential truths, was gone forever. But it also raised a darker question. What if he didn't just die? Was this karma? Coincidence? Or something meant to keep him from ever speaking again? As one investigator put it, his death didn't close doors. It opened new ones. It brought mystery, suspicion, and more mud into already cloudy waters. And then came what no one saw coming. Just a few days after his leg was found, a young boy walking near the same creek noticed something strange near the bank. A pale, round shape sticking out from the mud. When police arrived, they realized it was a human skull. The scene was sealed off immediately. Forensics teams swept in, and soon after, members of the Wix family themselves came to the area. They'd lived for 20 years without answers, 20 years of wondering. They began to search too, and during that search they made another horrifying discovery. More human remains. Their hearts dropped. It was the kind of pain that steals the air right out of your chest. In their public statement afterward, the family shared how surreal it all felt. They said they'd been the ones to find additional remains near Springfield Greenway, close to Sulphur Fork Creek, the same area where the skull had been found. They said a child had discovered the skull first, something no child should ever have to see. Their message carried both grief and exhaustion. 2 decades of it. They pleaded with the local sheriff's office to address the community, to acknowledge the discoveries, to take this case seriously once and for all. They believed the remains likely belonged to Joseph Benton, one of the last known people to see Jennifer and Adriana alive. In the days that followed, Springfield police brought in underwater dive teams and cadaver dogs to search the creek and its surroundings. The area was combed for days, inch by inch. But after all that, there were still no official updates. Just silence. What they did recover was sent to the medical examiner's office for testing, but identification takes time. Painful, dragging time. For the Wix family, the discovery tore open wounds that had never fully healed. They said it was almost impossible to describe what it felt like. The shock, the grief, the hollow ache of maybe finally being close to answers, yet terrified of what those answers could be. They've lived more than 20 years in a limbo of heartbreak and hope, waiting to know what truly happened to Jennifer and Adriana. And now, with Benton Sr. dead and remains surfacing where he once lived, the question isn't just what happened. How much longer can the truth hide before it's forced into the light? The family released another statement not long after, and this one carried a depth of emotion that went beyond grief. It was pain mixed with exhaustion and a desperate plea for truth. They said the possibility that the remains could belong to Joe Benton, one of the last people ever to see Jennifer and Adriana alive, both terrified and burdened them in ways words couldn't truly capture. They spoke with the weight of 20 years on their shoulders, 2 decades of unanswered questions. And yet, in their words, they still found room for grace. They offered prayers for the forensic teams, for law enforcement, and for every investigator still working this case. They prayed for truth, for justice, for closure, not just for their family, but for everyone touched by this story. But then came the plea. They urged the Robertson County Sheriff's Office, the 19th Judicial District Attorney's Office, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and every agency involved to be transparent, to let the community know what's been found, what the forensic results show, and how these discoveries might connect to Jennifer and Adriana's disappearance. They said the community deserved answers, a right to know and a right to demand accountability. To the citizens of Springfield, they expressed gratitude for every prayer, every act of kindness, every bit of support. They asked that people avoid speculation and give investigators the space to do their jobs. And then they ended with something powerful, something that cut through the noise of years of silence. They said they would not falter, they would not rest, not until truth prevailed and justice was done. But beneath those words lingered the same painful uncertainty, the ache of a family who's been waiting for far too long. When asked about the likelihood of investigators sharing new information with the public, one investigator explained that it wasn't simple. Transparency, he said, was important, especially with families. But timing mattered too. If authorities were zeroing in on a suspect, releasing too much too soon could spook them and risk everything. It's a delicate balance. Justice versus caution, truth versus timing. The investigator added that while finding a single limb was shocking, discovering a skull, possibly belonging to the same person, took things to another level. It meant that a potential witness, a man who might have held the final pieces to Jennifer and Adriana's mystery, was now officially gone. And what haunted everyone the most wasn't just what was found, it was what wasn't. Because during the initial search after that first bone was discovered, investigators scoured the area with dive teams, dogs, and drones. They searched for hours, even days, and came up empty. Nothing else. Until now. Now, with more remains surfacing in that same creek, 20 years after Jennifer and Adriana vanished, the question is no longer if something happened there. It's how deep the truth really goes. Weeks passed after the first grisly discovery at the creek. The leg, then the skull, then more bones. And it raised a haunting question that no one could quite shake. Had those remains been there all along? Were they somehow missed in the initial search, or did someone place them there later, deliberately, to send a message or hide a deeper truth? Even investigators admitted they just didn't know. And as they worked to determine who the skull belonged to, the challenge became clear. Identifying someone from a human skull is painstaking. DNA can help, but it's not instant. Dental records often tell the clearest story, yet even that requires careful verification. Every tooth, every fragment, every trace of genetic material becomes a clue in a puzzle that's 2 decades old. While the forensic team dug for answers in the lab, Jennifer's sister Casey was still digging in her own way, with a microphone. She had started her podcast Missing in Hushtown the previous year, working with producer Jules Thorpe to keep the story alive. Through that show, they reignited interest in the case, and more importantly, they got people talking. According to Thorpe, dozens of people reached out after hearing the podcast, whispering versions of the same sentence. "I wish I could tell you what I know, but I'm too scared." And that fear, that silence, may be the very thing keeping Jennifer and Adriana's truth locked away. Investigators urged those people to come forward, saying there were safe ways to share what they knew. Anonymous tip lines exist for a reason, to protect those who want to do the right thing without putting themselves in danger. Because no matter how much time passes, even the smallest piece of information, a sighting, a conversation overheard, a memory long buried, could be the one that cracks a 20-year mystery. Authorities made it clear, anyone with information about the disappearance of Jennifer and Adriana Wix should contact the Robertson County Sheriff's Office or call 1-800-TBIFIND. Because after everything that's surfaced, the lies, the raids, the bones in the creek, one truth remains unshakable. Someone out there knows exactly what happened. And after 2 decades of silence, it's time they finally spoke. When asked if we're any closer to answers, after all these years, all these searches, all this pain, he didn't pause. "Yes," he said quietly, "I believe we are." He's worked cold cases for decades, seen files grow yellow with time, seen families age waiting for truth. And yet, his words carried conviction. You never give up. That, he explained, is the lifeblood of cold case work. You hold on. You dig again, even when the world has moved on. Because sometimes it's not science that breaks a case open. It's someone's conscience finally cracking under the weight of memory. People can carry secrets for years, but the truth has a strange way of surfacing. In a whispered confession, an offhand comment, a moment of guilt that refuses to fade. Maybe someone out there knows what happened to Jennifer and Adriana. Maybe they've carried it too long. That's why you keep going. You stay patient. You keep believing. He spoke of the Wix family with quiet admiration, their courage, their grace through 2 decades of unanswered questions. He said he couldn't imagine the strength it takes to keep showing up, to keep hoping when the world keeps disappointing you. So that's where things stand. Not with closure, but with hope. Hope that the silence won't last forever. Hope that justice, however late, will still find its way home. This story isn't finished. Not yet. But when the truth finally surfaces, we'll be here, ready to tell it. We've come to the end of today's episode, and I'm sure you enjoyed it. But tell me something. When you hear stories like this, what do you feel? Pity? Sadness? Or do you just move on and tell yourself there's nothing you can do? Because that's what everyone said when Jennifer and Adriana vanished. Everyone waited for someone else to speak, someone else to care, someone else to act. And that silence is what kept the truth buried. That silence protected whoever was responsible. That silence is why a family has spent over 20 years waking up to the same question and going to bed without an answer. So what about you? Are you going to be another silent witness? Another person who looks away when the story gets too heavy? Because that's how evil wins. Not with action, but with indifference. If this story made you feel something, do not keep it to yourself. Talk about it. Share it. Keep their names alive. Every voice matters, every conversation helps, and maybe yours is the one that finally brings light to where it's been dark for far too long. Jennifer and Adriana's story is not just about loss. It's about how easily the world forgets. Don't forget them. Not again.